So, welcome back to 3rd Age Reforged and to another battle replay, and we're going to return to doing a siege today. And as the Golden Hall is here, of course, this is going to be Edoras. And seeing as I'm actually recording this on what is officially the last day of winter, it also doubly makes sense to do this battle, because obviously it is snowy today. Now, Rohan may not be on the defence. I assume that all of their army was killed out in the field, and so they're going to have to rely on their allies to help them out. It is a good versus evil siege, good on the defence, with Arthedain and Lindon trying to hold down the fort of Rohan's capital, and Mordor, Angmar and Khand all the way around the outsides. Let's go through the attackers first and foremost. Of course, Edoras, before we actually do that. Edoras is a reasonably difficult settlement to defend, actually. Yes, the choke points that lead up the hills are very nice for the defenders. Also, the fact that it is a constant uphill battle for the attackers can be pretty punishing, especially if the archers on the defence are well positioned. However, it is a very open settlement. The walls are not all that useful on Edoras, these palisade walls all the way around the outside, because of course you can beat them down with rams very easily and make a lot of ways in. So the very outermost road around the settlement is actually quite difficult to hold, and very quickly the defenders can find themselves falling back on the old structure of the map, actually, with the two hills that, well, this path that leads up this side, and it used to just be one path over on this side as well, but now there is this sort of intersecting path, which means there is more options for the attackers. But also the hill can work in the attackers' favour as well, because it does mean the defenders are a little bit more exposed to their ranged units, be it archers, crossbowmen, or javelin men. We'll see how that pans out. Khand should be pretty decent in a siege like this, to be honest with you, for the same reasons we saw in the last battle against Rohan on an open field. They're actually reasonably at home when they're fighting on foot in an atrocious battle like this, as long as they can take their time. They don't necessarily have the best units in terms of defensive skill, or any, really outside the Brotherhood units. Most of their units are quite functional and focus more on outlasting their opponents than out-damaging them. But that's exactly the sort of thing that is very useful in a situation like this. The Variag Bowman here from Hrothgar Havenlight, or Heavenlight I should say, who sent me the battle replay, so big thank you to him. The upgrade on the Variag Bowman makes them even more effective at this, so similar to upgrading the Belagire archers, although in 0.97 standard, which this battle is on. They're actually even better because their armour is a little bit stronger than the base armour of the Belagire. We also have the even stronger nomadic infantry. There are fewer in the unit, which means I do lean towards the slightly cheaper Variag Bowman when deciding between the two units, but there is no doubt that the nomadic infantry are the stronger unit individually and bear a little bit more in common with the likes of the Bardian Marksman and the Balaketh Marksman, units like that. The difference is that you can't upgrade their armour, so they are sort of stuck at being what they are originally, which is a bit of a shame, and they're also a little bit weaker, I think, than those two units in general. But it's the same sort of thing. Like, you're not going to lose many skirmish fights, especially if you combine both of these two units. It's a very difficult thing to deal with. And also nomadic raiders, so a lot of archers from Hrothgar, so he's definitely going to be trying to take the slow and steady approach, which I think is right as Khand, because like I said, you don't really have the damage dealers in the quantity that you need in order to be able to force your way through easily. You can kind of go through the Orc philosophy of bringing, like, for example, Nurad footmen over here, who have decent armour and decent shields, who are capable of withstanding quite a lot of punishment and dishing out a bit of AP damage. And you can also bring a lot of stuff like nomadic axemen if they've been brought today. They haven't, I don't think. A lot more Nurads, but ultimately I do think the way that Khand can engage in this sort of slow and steady approach is probably a little bit more of a good idea in this situation, especially against Lindon, because one thing Khand can do, of course, is do a lot of AP damage with units like the Nurad footmen. That's not going to be as much of a concern for Lindon though, so yeah, I think this is the right composition to bring in this situation from Hrothgar, going a little bit more into the archers and trying to wear them down. We also have the Hwacha, which is a really interesting piece of artillery actually on this map, because if the defenders, as we sort of go a little bit higher, if they sort of deploy along the face of that hill, the Hwacha is going to have a field day. So it is going to sort of shape the battle a little bit here, I think, unless of course the defenders have got artillery that can snipe this out. I think that would be worthwhile actually, because the Hwacha in this sort of situation can be a real pain in the ass for you if you are trying to defend against it, but you can't really engage it. If you have to try and tank the kills, it can do a lot of damage across your whole army. Now the Brotherhood units, of course, are pretty much the exception to the rule. They are Khan's genuinely strong infantry units. You can't really bring them in huge quantities. You have to make a judgment on which ones to bring. I think the Brotherhood of the Axe is the right choice in this situation, because while Lindon won't be too concerned if they can get a unit of quality heavy swordsmen onto them, they will be very useful against Arthedain's main line if they can get in and amongst them. That AP damage and the amount of damage they have as well, considering they're quite an expensive unit, will be very, very useful indeed. And the Nurad Stormguard for the same reasons, though of course they are a General's Bodyguard unit, so multiple HP. Halberdiers technically, although they do lack the Phalanx formation, but once they get in and amongst things with the Brotherhood of the Axe, Arthedain in particular are going to be in a bit of trouble, I think. If that comes to pass, of course. Variag Warriors as well with the armour upgrade. I do think this is the right move as well, because when it comes to engaging in melee, outside of all the arrows that are inevitably going to be flying around all over the battlefield. This is one of the more cost-effective units Khan can bring against the elves, especially with the armour upgrade. They will still lose most infantry fights against the elves with this unit, but they will put up a better fight than the lower tier Khandish units, and they will be a little bit more efficient as well than the AP focused Nurad that they're going to be fighting alongside. The halberds are a good idea as long as they are saved till later, because of course a phalanx unit like this will be the first port of call for any defending archers, but if they are saved until later on in the game, they can be very useful, albeit Arthedain and Lindon are two factions that have a lot of pikemen, which of course can slowly but surely counter halberdiers in melee. Then we have Angmar, played by Gothmog. He's got the witches over here, everyone's favourite. We'll see if they do anything significant in this battle. Some goblin band. Deceptively, they look like the orc fodder, but they're not. They're a little bit more useful than the orc fodder, but overall, again, being the best among fodder is not exactly a huge accolade. Witcher on pikemen again. We'll see if Gothmog's pikes are saved till later. If they get committed earlier on, even though they are more heavily armoured than the Nurad over on the other side, they will still be ripped apart, especially by the stronger Arthedain and Linden archers. Both of those factions got access to some very good archers after all. More pikes, some Snaga, pushing up a ram, obviously again, free unit. Lots of rams on display for Angmar, which is definitely the right thing, poking a lot of holes in the outer walls. Blackwatch Legion, which again, the right choice to bring in a siege like this. Any siege, I think Angmar should be thinking about bringing the Blackwatch Legion, because you can push through defending positions quite easily, especially with more lightweight factions like Lindon. Blackguard and Hammerguard, the sort of axis of the high-tier Angmar infantry units, both of them will be very useful for different reasons. I think the Blackguard will be more universally useful because they'll also be quite at home with fighting the Linden elves, whereas the Hammerguard will be a little bit more specialised around fighting the Noldorin and the heavily armoured legions from Angmar. Scourge Raiders, again, throw a projectile, charge into melee, quite weak to arrow fire once again though. And then we have some Trolls, of course, some Trolls of Angmar, and some Trolls of Gundabad. A little bit surprised actually not to see Guardians of Kharndoom. This is not the full extent of the Angmar army though, so I'd imagine around here there are probably Orc Fellas, and there are Snaga Archers and Goblin Trackers as well. Orc Fellas are a good idea because of their AP. Cheap Archers, always a good idea, just so you can make life a little bit less comfortable for the defenders. And then finally we have Clem, going to be playing as Mordor, a little bit more numbers focused than Angmar on average, but they definitely have a few toys they can play with as well. Lots of Moran on infantry. Going to be pushing up the rams again, exactly the right choice. Open up as many holes in the outer wall as you possibly can before moving forwards. Moran on archers as well, again nothing too special, but they will at least outperform the Angmar archers they're fighting alongside, and they're not really designed to be match winners, they're just designed to be here to do some damage. Bit of cavalry, which I do actually agree with. Temple Inquisitors, I maybe wouldn't have tasked Mordor with doing this. I maybe would have asked Khan to bring a couple of units of cheaper melee cav in case of a sally out, but there's no doubt that if Lindon or Arthedain have gone for any cavalry of their own, unless it's something like the Horse Lords of Ulmo or the Knights of Annúminas, if they've just gone for some sort of basic Lancers or multiple HP Lancers even, in the case of Arthedain, the Temple Inquisitors would be able to clean them up. But it is an interesting pick actually, because I would have imagined, especially in 0.97's meta, if they were going to bring cavalry, they probably would go for Knights of Annúminas and Horse Lords of Ulmo, which the Temple Inquisitors, certainly against the Horse Lords, I think if they take a charge, will probably lose to. A little bit more debatable with the Knights of Annúminas, but even so, it won't be a smooth sailing for them, and it's an expensive unit as well. I probably would have preferred maybe Khan to handle that myself with all their melee cavalry, but again, it is what it is. Blackguard of Barad-dûr in big numbers, good choice for the same reason as the Blackwatch Legion. Sauron's Will for the AP, and of course all the buffs that they bring. I think it's a buff they have, or is it fear? No, it is it's one of the two. It's either they buff their allied troops or they cause fear to the defending troops. Much more useful for Mordor in this case if it's buffing their allied troops, because they're not going to easily be able to cause Arthedain, and especially not Lindon, to rout, considering what Edoras is. Orc Javelins, Nazgul, Temple Executioners without the armour upgrade, some Troll Drummers, they definitely will have a buff of course, and some Oleg High back here. Pretty standard as far as Mordor goes. Cheap Javelins, lots of Moranon to hold down the fort at the front, and then they've got some specialist troops in terms of AP, high TA infantry at the back, and some Blackguard. Good composition I think for the situation. Now though for the defenders we have Lindon, played by Clitati. He's got some Harlinden infantry, again good choice to bring. This is obviously standard 0.97, so the shock infantry buff hasn't come into effect yet, so the Harland infantry are definitely the more efficient pick over the Mithlon Swordmasters in pretty much any situation, to be honest. Dunedain Rangers, we have some Forlinder Marines back here as well. Dunedain Troll Slayers, so lots of good stuff here at the back. Annúminas Gate Guards, as you would expect. Noldorin Blade Masters are in and amongst actually some Mithlon Swordmasters. From a distance there, it looked like the old Noldorin Blade Master unit model was back, which obviously it's a good thing they're not, because the new one looks so much better. Dismounted Knights of Innuminus are back here as well, obviously good to buff morale and stay fighting for a long time, as are the Linden Guard, albeit to a slightly lesser extent because they're not multiple HP. Mythlon Marines, 4 Lindon Marines, pretty much what you'd expect. Dunedain Peacekeepers, again, a unit I very much approve of. They'll be very useful actually against a lot of the lower end orcs they're going to be facing off against, I think, because they're extra damage. You don't need a huge amount of defense to deal with basic orcs, but the damage means they'll be able to cut their way through them a little bit faster. Warns of the North with their AP arrows, Arthedain Marksmen. We have some Fornos terrain defenders, lots of pikes and infantry as you'd expect from Lindon. Arthedain Marksmen once again. Warns of Elos Tyrian, so the Rangers obviously will see if the frames suffer, but this map has never been a problem child, so hopefully that isn't going to be the case here. Linden Guard, Arthedain Marksmen, some more Linden Guard, Lindon Infantry as well. Arthedain Pikemen a little bit further down here. Most of their troops are concentrated a little bit further back, which I do agree with. They've got some Dunedain Scouts actually, and some Evendim Archers here at the front, and a lot of Evendim Spears from Son of the Dunedain, who's playing pretty much the most appropriate faction for his name in Arthedain. He needs to send some quality units down here though. A bunch of Evendim are not going to be able to hold against a full-blooded Khandish assault, especially not if the Watcher opens up as well. They'll rout pretty quickly, but we'll see what he does, because without further ado, let's begin. He definitely needs to get the Dunedain Scouts out of the settlement as quickly as he possibly can, to be honest with you. He's going to need to continuously micro them as well, because of course the Temple Inquisitors will probably want to try and hunt them down, but they won't want to be kited around by the Dunedain Scouts if they can help it. The problem here that Arthedain are going to have, I think, in using the Dunedain Scouts against Khand is Khand are very easily going to be able to zone them out with all their archers that they brought. The problem Khand will have is they can't easily get value off either, because it's mostly lower end units that are here in the initial defence, and they're going to have to respond, Khand, to the Evendim Archers firing into them. You can see that there are arrows being traded here, but many of them are missing and hitting the snow. Dunedain Scouts trying to do their thing. But yeah, I mean, this is interesting. I suppose from that point of view, Son of the Dunedain is doing the right thing, but he definitely needs to have more units on standby ready to hold this position if that's what he wants to do. He might just want to abandon it because of the Watcher, which honestly I would kind of agree with, but if that's the case, you should at least save some of this militia as well. 4 units is far too many to just sacrifice to the gods. And the Evendim Spears can make a pretty decent addition to a nice front line if you're defending. In an atrocious sense, they make a pretty decent screen for your pikes as Arthedain, as many people know. Obviously, it's a very popular combination to have. Cheap and cheerful. Meanwhile, Dunedain Scouts haven't actually taken any losses as of yet, which really, well, as soon as I say that, open my big mouth, one of them does fall. 2 of them actually, but there was quite a few volleys they took without taking losses, so not a hugely impressive showing from the first wave of Khandish archers, but then of course this is the lowest tier of Khand archer, the nomadic raiders, so maybe not to be too surprised about, but in terms of a skirmish fight between these two, Evendim archers and nomadic raiders, I back the Evendim archers. They do have a bit of a shield value. They got the first few volleys as well, which is very key, and the Dunedain Scouts, I mean the Dunedain Scouts would honestly be best off waiting till later on in the battle, I think, but they will need to be continuously microed if the Temple Inquisitors intend on hunting them down. But this is a good way to get value off with the Scouts. If they can kite the Temple Inquisitors around the perimeter of the map, you know, if you trade these 2 units, then that is a trade that favours Arthedain, but it will require constant micro, which obviously is something both players are going to have to keep in mind. Nurad footmen are advancing forward. They will probably be the target of some more serious archer fire, but they'll be able to tank quite a lot of these shots. Obviously a pretty hefty shield value on them. Their armour is decent as well. It's not up to the same sort of level as like a Gondor or a fully upgraded Arthedain man-at-arms in terms of line infantry, but their shield does most of the work. Their armour picks up the slack, and not a huge amount of losses there. Just a few deadens, and they'll just be here to knock a few holes in the wall. And the Evendim Spearmen are the temptation might be to try and counter-attack outside this wall to surround the Nurad footmen. I'm not sure whether that's such a good idea. Like, how Son of the Dunedain uses these Evendim Spearmen could be pretty key, actually, because if you start to rack up a big deficit in terms of numbers as the defenders, and I think this is the right thing he's doing now, it's really hard to make it back, and he is now going to move backwards. Will the Watcher start firing? I mean, the Watcher, to be honest with you, considering the way that the defenders may be setting the table out here, and trying to defend the highest reach of the settlement first and foremost, the Watcher may not be all that useful. Advancing happening on the other side. As soon as the movies stop, I'll be able to zoom on over there. Meanwhile, so yeah, Angmar over here putting a few holes in the wall. Angmar furthest away, considering how the defenders are sort of consolidating their troops mostly further at the back. They're going to be the last ones to be attacked, I think. Mordor, meanwhile, over here, which actually suits the attacks, I think, because Angmar, I think, generally will spend more on individual units than Khand and Mordor will. A little bit more elite focused, I think, maybe. Khand doing the business there. Meanwhile, this could be... oh yeah, that's a disaster. Disastrous micro from the Dunedain scouts there. I was wondering what was happening here, but it's not really excusable to allow your very fast-moving, lightly armoured horse archers to be caught by Temple Inquisitors, and that is a problem. I mean, they can still kite around the Dunedain scouts, but one more mistake like that and they'll rout. Like, the Temple Inquisitors will rip the Dunedain scouts to pieces in melee, and the Nomadic Raiders can sense weakness because they're also going to try and continue to shoot into the Dunedain scouts, and one more of them falls. So, yeah, that's just a case of losing micro. I think he was more focused on retreating his Evendim spears, and as a result, he has lost the lion's share of that horse archer unit. Not great for that. However, the attacker's starting to move forward. I mean, it's not an overly long battle, 27,000 frames, so it does indicate the attackers are going to be decently aggressive. The problem for the attackers, of course, is going to be they need to shut down the Rangers somehow. The Rangers are inevitably going to try and get into a good position to really do the damage. The Wardens of Tyrion especially, because they've got an extra missile damage over the Dunedain Rangers. But having said that, I think Khand especially have got the archers to focus them down. All of the attacking factions have got some kind of archer presence, and perhaps being overly aggressive here is not the play. Maybe trying to take your time. The Snaga archers are here. What are they going after? Are they going after the Wardens of Tyrion? Because they definitely should be. No, they're going after the Linden Guard, which is a shame. Even, I think the Arthedain pikemen would actually be the better choice there, because at least they'd be more likely to get kills. But they definitely need to saturate fire onto the Rangers. You take away a defender's Rangers and they become substantially less scary. Evendim Spearmen are moving backwards as the Nomadic Raiders continue to get into position. Goblin Band are over here, so the outer reaches of the settlement already surrendered by the defenders. But like I said, I think that's the right idea, especially on this side, because if they were to defend this hill, the Watcher would have been a massive issue, because it would have had easy hits. And like I said, the defenders really can't afford to take atrocious casualties like that if they can help it. Are they routing off the Dunedain? Temple Inquisitors are pursuing nothing, rubbing up against the outside of the map. Dunedain scouts trying to poke and prod at the enemies here, but I mean, they're done. They're done out here. Only 5 of them remaining, and even if they do get kills, it'll be very, very small amounts of kills at this point, and all one of the Khandish archers needs to do is turn around, a few volleys. And yeah, you can see over here the lightly armoured mounted Dunedain easily being dealt with. Meanwhile, a bit of a melee engagement here. It's interesting that this growth has happened inside Edoras, all of this grass. It's pretty long. Harland infantry, though, charging downhill, of course, they'll be able to clean up Snaga Stalkers in melee pretty easily. There's a lot of arrows flying in, primarily as well from the attackers here. Moranon infantry getting in position, maybe even ready to help Angmar out. Goblin Band as well, slowly but surely. Orc fodder marching forwards. I mean, Nolder and Guard here are sort of taking cover behind the house to make sure they don't take arrow fire. They are still getting hit, but of course well shielded and armoured for a Lindon unit, so they're going to be able to deal with that much more easily than most. What, are they going to hope to jump out and surprise the Orcs as they move past? I mean, they'll cut Orc fodder to pieces. But I mean, this one unit of Harland and Guard is not, well, Harland infantry I should say, is going to get overwhelmed eventually. I mean, of course, they're going to rack up quite a kill count here with the Snaga. Arrows being traded between both sides. Evendim archers shooting from on high, trying to hit this blob. Goblin Band and Moranon infantry moving in now, and now is when the numbers start to get a little bit dicey for a single unit of Elven infantry. Harland and Guard are here. I mean, again, trading fire like this is something Lindon struggle to do generally. And with all of the archers, I feel as though the attackers have been quite savvy with their composition here, because yes, they don't have as much infantry to play around with, but they can afford to take their time. They can try and wear down the defenders with all their archers, and I feel as though that's going to be the right move, because not only does it play into the strengths, especially of Khand, and to a lesser extent Mordor, I think, but it exploits one of the main weaknesses of Lindon. And so far, you can see here, Arthedain marksman getting into melee alongside the Evendim spearman. The Nurad are coming forward. Halberds committed early from Hrothgar, which is a pretty bold move. They're in though, and they should have the melee abilities between the two of these Nurad units to slowly but surely kill off a unit of Evendim. But this is one of those interesting fights where the real battle is actually happening between the archers and ranged units on both sides. So far, I think the attacks have done quite well, but I would also say that the defenders haven't really committed anything to that yet. Like, they haven't started to open up with their rangers, they haven't committed forward their javelin men. Both of the factions have some pretty nasty ones, which I think could be where they really start to do some genuine damage. Isengard and Aberdeen Spearmen, a bit of an interesting sort of layout to this line between Clatati and Son of the Dunedain. Orc fodder immediately rout as soon as they make contact with the front line, but again, the attackers just trying to wear down. I don't think that's the right target to go after. A unit of Aberdeen Spears and Shield Wall is not the unit to be targeting down. You can't afford to just waste your ammunition willy-nilly, even if it is stuff like Snarger archers. When you're facing off against a faction that's slightly armoured like Lindon, you can make even very cheap archers like that work for you if you're a little bit more careful with what you're doing. You can't afford to be clumsy like that. Because if you make it all about a melee engagement later on when you don't have any range support, Lindon will make you suffer for that. Especially with their Noldorin. Barrow Wights moving forward. That's another unit. I keep forgetting about the Barrow Wights when Angmar have got a small looking army and I know they've got stuff hidden. Good choice on this occasion though. They can absorb a lot of punishment, especially in melee. But over here, the Noldorin Guard once again hiding behind the house, letting the Emmendim Spearmen take up the slack for the time being. Morannon Infantry, I would back them in a fight normally against them, but the Emmendim Spears do have support that's close by and they have the hill advantage, which may be playing into their hands a little bit. The Morannon Infantry also are shaken, and especially with the advance of the Noldorin Guard, that might be enough to push Clem's initial assault here over the edge. I don't think the Trolls are in range of them to give the buffer here, but this Morannon Infantry unit probably is in range. Emmendim Spearmen charging down the hill, so Arthedain so far committing their militia to help out some slightly more sturdy units of Lindon over on this side. Well, sturdy is not the right word when it comes to Lindon. Expert units, elite. Meanwhile over here, yeah, this result was never in doubt. Like, there was no Lindon quality over here. The Emmendim Spears were being backed up by Arthedain marksmen, and they were up against more serious threats as well in the Nurad footmen and halberds combined. And Arthedain are already being pushed back off their hill over here. They need support, and you can see just coming over the hill there are some Arthedain pikemen. A little bit too late though. They should have been committed a little bit sooner if they were coming down here. Yes, they're going to get shot by arrows inevitably, but you need something over here. I think it's actually interesting here. Ooh, there we go. There's the Hwacha, and that's devastation. That's a perfect position to put the Hwacha into. And now, with how the defenders retreated up on top of this hill and tried to consolidate their position, they've been punished for that immediately. It doesn't look like much, it doesn't look like they've been devastated from that, but a lot of units just lost a little piece of their manpower, and that's a good amount of kills that they just picked up. And now what do the defenders do? Because they're in trouble. They need to answer this somehow. The Hwacha's going to continue to fire. They need to scatter, because they can't get to the Hwacha at this point. They backed up enough to the point where the attackers are going to block any approach to the Hwacha here. And once again, another... How far are these missiles going to go? Or rockets, I should say. And they're going to hit all the way back here into the heart of the town centre. And there you go. I mean, the Hwacha is, against individual units, not devastating. Certainly not in the way a trebuchet can be in this situation. Can you imagine a well-placed trebuchet shot in here? That could be a match ender, really. But the defenders, this is the downside. When you retreat backwards, yes, the positions are nice, and yes, you have plenty of reserves to hold on to a smaller area overall. But you have boxed yourself up, and if the attackers have got the ability to exploit that and they manage to do it, you're always going to be in a bit of trouble. And I'm wondering here, the Hwacha still has probably a good 3 volleys left in it. When it uses up all of its ammunition, it won't be enough to convince me to think that the match is over, but the attackers have to go in as overwhelming favourites following that. And the moral of this story may be, don't abandon your outer defences too early. The Hwacha may well have done the same thing over here, but this was more devastating because it's hit most of the elites for the defenders as well, which is a massive problem. Nurad footmen starting to make their way around here. We've got some Grey Company actually over here from Son of the Dunedain, as well as some more Grey Company. 2 Grey Company, that's a bit greedy for me. And also a mistake, to be honest with you. I think bringing 2 Grey Company is a little bit of a vanity project if you're an Arthedain player, especially on the defence in a siege, because you definitely need to get them outside the walls if you're going to do that. Like, what are they doing back here? They're not going to be very... They can still be used as rangers, I suppose, but at that point, why not just bring 2 Dunedain rangers? It'd work out to be cheaper and more effective, because there's more rangers on foot than there are on horseback. No matter. There is still quite a lot of damage being done to the Khandish skirmish line, but it's damage that's not being done to the Khandish infantry, to be honest with you. And the Khandish skirmishers giving as good as they get to the archers at the top of the... Well, I say that. They are losing the skirmish fight, of course, but Khand won't be too concerned about that. They're doing the business with the Hwacha. or they were doing the business with the Hwacha, and maybe they're satisfied. That might be the whole of the Hwacha's ammunition, to be honest with you. It doesn't have a huge ammo supply, but good damage being done there. I approve. Meanwhile, Noldor and Evan Swimmen still very easily holding the line down here. Clem is still content to just send forward Moranil on both archers and standard line infantry, but it's not really working out for him so far. Not really making any progress, in fact negative progress. They're being pushed back down the hill. Over here though, Trolls coming in, Barrow Wights coming in, a little bit more of a serious problem over here. Angmar making more progress than Mordor, and that will concern the defenders, because what do the defenders do now? Do they continue to try and hold on to these positions? I'd be coming down in favour of no, honestly. But I mean, it is interesting. Like, the momentum is definitely with the attackers here, you can see it. And I don't think the defenders know what to do. I think they're panicking a little bit after losing quite a lot of their manpower. Because the match is not over, but I don't think they were expecting to take that damage from the Hwacha. I think they thought they were safe from it by pulling back. Yeah, the Hwacha's out of ammo. But they weren't, and they've already paid quite dearly for that. But they need to sort of regroup. Evendim Spearmen are routing. 4 Lindon Marines who have used their ammunition, Harland infantry. The Javelins for Lindon will have done quite a lot of damage, but the Barrow Wights can absorb quite a lot of punishment. The Trolls are coming forward. And yeah, these front lines are... This front line over here is definitely not organised. This front line over here is organised. But it's made up of substantially better troops than Snaga. The Nurad are really doing a good job at engaging in a slow push, as you would expect from them, to be honest. Meanwhile, as we zoom back over here, once again, Nomadic Raiders still taking damage. Unfortunately for them, I mean, that's a lot of Grey Company. Like, if you're going to bring 2 Grey Company, go into the red limit, why are you not bringing a unit of Knights of Annúminas? Knights of Annúminas out in the open field as well could have harried that Hwacha. Even a unit of Royal Court of House Armlaith, if you couldn't afford the Knights, would have done the same job. So it's highly questionable to bring 2 Grey Company units. Again, it smacks of a bit of a vanity project. Maybe it's the player's favourite unit, maybe they just want to use the Mounted Rangers, but that's fine. But from an efficiency standpoint, it's obviously not the best thing to do. Trolls now, yeah, this is obviously what you want to be doing now. Trolls collapsing into the back of this line, which now the pikes are going to get ripped apart. Trolls, excellent counter against pikes. I think most people think pikes are good against trolls. It's sort of a myth that's been propagated ever since Vanilla Third Age. It's not true. Pikes run on being able to keep their formation in place and their phalanx there. Trolls have got such high mass and they just roll through units that the pikes formation is taken completely out of the equation, and then their low stats are ruthlessly exploited by the damage of the trolls, and the pikes can't even do a lot of damage to the trolls in return. It's a little bit different with halberdiers, because halberdiers can do a little bit more damage to the trolls in return, but certainly not the case with pikes. Meanwhile, again, these Harland and Guard, like the defenders, they haven't been able to sort of reorganise their line out here at all, and the brute force of the attackers in full effect. There's still a long way to go in this fight, so the defenders should be able to rally and have a bit of a second wind. And there are a lot of these Lindon units in and amongst things, but the problem is they just don't have the support. And forward come the Variags, the Nurads, Temple Inquisitors moving forward. There are Mithlon Swordmasters in here, but they're getting ridden down by cavalry. This has more of a look of like a Mountain Blade battle at this point, where there's just a massive blob of chaos. The lines have faltered, certainly. Goblin Band moving forward with the support of the Barrow Wights. Not a lot of high damage over here, but the pressure is still being put on. The numbers are still following through. Mordor now following Angmar's footsteps, finally pushing back against the defence that was here, committing their Olag High in. More quality units in the Temple Executioners as well. So they took quite a few losses, Mordor, but nothing too important, and ultimately they are going to be able to follow in the footsteps of Angmar and Khand here, which is very good for the attackers. And still there's not a lot of organisation. Still the Trolls are pushing forward. The Trolls will eventually bite off more than they can chew here. They're getting into more dangerous units now, like Dunedain Peacekeepers and Noldor and Guard. But the longer they can keep the defenders from sort of resetting their lines, the more progress the attackers can make. The attackers have made such rapid progress, I don't think they were actually ready for it, because a lot of their units are still far back, like the Variag Warriors. The Angmar units back there are just biding their time. Can't have taken losses though, so it has sort of been rough for them. Grey Company back here. Khand, of course, are also attacking on multiple fronts. This down here is a fight that's not going quite so well for them, but this really is more of a token force. Dismounted Knights of Annúminas and sort of decent Lindon infantry and the Harland infantry are engaged here. Kind of just putting some pressure on from the back end here to make sure that they can't put all of their troops at the front, which is the right thing to do. Absolutely the right thing to do. I'd maybe send the Variag Warriors along here as well, get ready to maybe push them along here as well. to make sure that that continues. There's still trolls over here. Mordor and Angmar between them can field an awful lot of heavily armoured trolls. They're getting in and amongst units which are actually not good against them either in the Fornoster Rain defenders. Any kills they can get at this point would be a real bonus because the trolls have already been very effective at helping to push through and take advantage of the disorganisation of the defending lines. The Watcher, of course. I still don't think the defenders have quite gotten over that. Like, again, it wasn't, on the surface of it, it wasn't a devastating series of blows that the Watcher dealt, but individually those losses do add up. Or collectively, I should say, those losses do add up. Isengard continuing to try and fire. Their shield makes them a little bit better in a skirmish fight like this, but they're still engaged in sort of a long ranged war, which is not really where Lindon want to be, especially not against Khan, who are much more at home in that particular theatre of war. Noldor and Guard have pushed too far forwards again. Don't know if they're trying to bail out some of these Lindon troops. I mean, to be fair, Lindon have pushed back a little bit here. And, you know, the trolls, I can see why, actually. Lindon have done a pretty decent job at sort of getting a handle on the chaos. The problem is, if the attackers really want to, they can push forward with a lot of numbers. Maybe not Khan so much anymore. They've taken quite a few losses. In come the Variag warriors to put more pressure on javelins. Still doing the business, going after the Temple Executioners. Actually, Clem needs to have a little bit more battlefield awareness than this, because they're losing their Temple Executioners at the hands of Mithlond Marines, and that's not what you want. The Trolls are doing their thing. Just a long line of Barrow-wights moving forward. The one thing I would worry about is that Angmar haven't committed any of their really dangerous units yet. Obviously the Witches are among that, but also Blackguard, Hammerguard, really dangerous units in the late game if they're untouched. Nomadic Infantry in a good position to fire. Looks like they just ran out of ammunition, but they're decent in melee as well. It's one of the main reasons why you'd want to bring them. The clue is in the name. They are infantry. Nice hybrid unit to have, and it means that Khan, even their archers, will be able to chip in melee and do a bit of business. This unit still has a bit of ammo, though. I think they're going to try and get in position over here. Harland Infantry now breaking. Trolls still causing all sorts of chaos, getting into the Mithlond Marines and stopping them from firing. Doing a crippling amount of damage to them, but it is always deceptive, because when the attackers are making rapid progress like this, it's a sign they're being really aggressive, which I like, but it's also a sign that they're going to lose men at a fairly rapid pace, to be honest with you. There was a bit of a drop in frames there, which is why I'm wondering. The ones of Tyrion, they're not firing. Where are the Rangers? I mean, the Rangers still haven't done much of anything yet. There's Dunedain Trollslayers there. Blackwatch Legion moving around the back. Witchrealm Scourge Raiders moving around the back. Khan's assault is slightly petering out. This unit of Variag Bowmen have engaged in melee as well, but that's not going to be enough to deal with Dismounted Knights of Numinous. But Scourge Raiders throwing a projectile in, a push from the Blackwatch Legion, that could be enough to cause a little bit more bother back here in the back way up to the Golden Hall. And it's nice to see this road utilised, because it is a bit of a daunting prospect for the attackers to go up such a narrow path if it's well defended. But they're committing to this. They've got the elites of Angmar over here as well, which they're going to need more down here. The Wardens of the North are here, the Troll Slayers are here, but they're not close enough to support that infantry. Grey Company are firing. Got to be a little bit careful, because that is a big blob. And the Blackguard of Barad-dûr, or Black Legion, Blackguard of Barad-dûr are pushing forward. That front line would do very well to withstand a push from depleted Trolls and fully healthy Blackguard. But they're actually managing for the time being, and if the Grey Company can continue to fire... Oh boy, that was nearly a crash, I could feel it. But I mean, this is the thing. Like, the Blackguard of Barad-dûr, Blackguard, I don't know why I keep calling them the Black Legion, but yeah, the Blackguard of Barad-dûr, those big shields will help them against Rangers, but Rangers ultimately, the amount of hits they score with just a single volley is so extreme that even great shield units like that don't really want to be feeling the full fury of them, especially not in a big blob like that. But Lindon holding the line for the time being down there. Over here now is probably where I'd be slightly more worried for the defenders. I mean, they're okay for the time being, but if they can push forward with the Blackwatch Legion and follow through with the Angmar elites, they're in massive trouble here. The Wardens of the North are firing in with their armour-piercing arrows. But yeah, as good as the Dismounted Knights of Numinous are, they need reinforcements. The Troll Slayers are coming down, the Wardens of the North are there, so that might be enough, to be honest with you, considering the terrain advantage the defenders have, but it's going to be touch and go here. It's a narrow choke point as well, so it'll be easier to try and counteract a mass push if they are willing to commit reinforcements down here, which they don't really have, to be fair. It's mostly ranged units that are trying to do the business there. Meanwhile, Grey Company, they were firing. Dunedain Rangers are firing. Not an easy shot, though. They're having to go over their own men to a certain extent. Orc Javelins are moving forward. Defeat is a distinct possibility. Mordor picking up the slack on the front line now. Sauron's Will and Blackguard of Barad-dûr moving in, and to be fair, they've counteracted that mass push very well. Time and time again in 0.97 we see the mass push is not quite as devastating as it used to be. You've got to do it at the right time, and I still think maybe the defenders were in good enough shape to take it. If they'd waited a little bit longer, that may have been more helpful, but I mean the good thing for Mordor here is they may be taking losses, but with the trolls and such, the drummers in close proximity, they're going to be difficult to rout, so they're going to continue to fight, and the damage they've already done here may be fairly devastating. That is green fire though. The Harland and Guard have taken some sort of losses. I mean the Witches are in there somewhere then, but if the Witches have made their presence known, the Rangers should have ripped them to pieces, which is worrying. If Angmar have not been able to do the business with their Witches, there's still all to play for, to be honest with you. Those Rangers are still firing. Getting one kill with Witches is definitely not what you want to be seeing if you're using them. Dunedain Troll Slayers, meanwhile, a devastating unit of Javelins, definitely. One of my personal favourites, not only because they're good with their Javelins, but also because they're so useful in melee. I think I prefer them over the Reforged Javelins of Rudar as well. The Reforged Javelins just have a lot more similar units around them to sort of back them up in that aspect of warfare, whereas Arthedain are kind of entirely reliant on them to do that for them. Meanwhile, it's time for the elites, I think. Hammerguard and Blackguard need to come forward at this point. The Grey Company's trying to stop the push, but the Blackwatch Legion are running out of steam at this point. You need more units alongside them. They may have maces, but they're not actually AP yet. In the hot fix, or cold fix, they are being made AP, which is long overdue. But also the Nolder and Blade Master coming in, which is definitely a sign you're going to need more elite units. Pushing through now, Nomadic Raiders, adding a bit more numbers to the situation. I mean, I think this is going to be, whoever wins this is going to be quite a Pyrrhic victory, because elites are going to be lost on both sides. Well, there goes the general. Stabbed with a very large mace, which can't be a comfortable experience, to say the least. Warns of Alos Tyrion are in a fantastic position to shoot into that front line. But, you know, the numbers are still with the attackers. And if the Rangers can't do sufficient damage quickly enough, their front line is faltering at this point. They're just running out of numbers. Their pikes are doing their best to hold the line, but they need these archers and javelins to do the business quickly, because if they don't, it's going to be all over. Troll Slayers are still here. Some 4 Lindon Marines making their way backwards. I mean, yeah, the defenders are running a little bit low on resources, but there's still, you know, just under 10,000 frames left. A decent portion of this fight still to go. So the defenders are not done yet. They're not going to collapse anytime soon. And here at the back end of the settlement, it's clear to see why. The Nolder and Blade Master here, like I said, weirdly enough, in standard 0.97, they're not actually locked morale, something that is being fixed in the hot fix, or cold fix. But even so, with support, like in terms of their melee abilities, they're still currently the strongest heavy swordsmen, although they will be supplanted by the Pharazim Swordmasters in the cold fix. They will technically be buffed and still lose out on their #1 spot. Dunedain Troll Slayers, meanwhile, doing some damage. There's routing from the Nomadic Raiders, not surprising considering the punishment they're under. There's still some Harland infantry back here. Yeah, I mean, they're stopped dead in their tracks here. The Hammer Guard, they don't match up, like, generally speaking, AP shock infantry doesn't do too well against heavy swordsmen, because the defensive skill tends to override the AP. And certainly in the case of the Blade Masters against the Hammer Guard, I'd back the Blade Masters. As good as the Hammer Guard are, devastating unit really, especially with the backup coming in from the Dunedain. That should be, or Dunedain I should say. I don't know why I've been calling them Dunedain this whole time. Ooh, we've got to be careful there. Warns of Alos Tyrion ripping right on through. The Nazgul are in there, javelins and ranger fire is being thrown, however. I have to say, the defenders have bounced back. There was a little while I was actually quite worried about them following the Watcher fire, ripping through those houses, causing a lot of damage here to Edoras. Whoever wins this battle, there's going to be quite a lot of rebuilding needing to be done on the settlement. But yeah, they have managed to utilise their rangers and javelins in the way you'd expect, but this is the problem you can see here. They're starting to work up the line now, the attackers. Barrow-wights, but more worryingly, Nurad Stormguard. Nurad Stormguard are not a unit to be taken lightly, especially when they get into the kill zone. They are going to do damage. The Troll Drummers are still in here as well, and this is another problem. Like, the Troll Drummers are just buffing things up. The Barrow-wights are very difficult to kill off. Pikes do damage slowly anyway, generally speaking. Even more so against Barrow-wights. Like, it's so difficult to do damage quickly against them. Forward come the Blackguard. They've taken a little bit of damage, actually, presumably from javelins. But they need to send them in now. Like, they need to do some business. The Hammer Guard are going to be doing a lot of damage to Grey Company in melee, but not so much to Blade Masters. There's still 3 Blackwatch Legion remaining, but obviously they ran out of steam. But they made progress. The Blackwatch Legion did their job. I just don't think the Angmar player was willing to send in the elites as quickly as they were needed. You've got to take advantage of the chaos. There wasn't as much chaos over here as there was on the front end, but that has been how the attackers have had their success so far in the battle, and if they do lose out, it'll be because the defenders have been able to sort of reorganise and stop them from causing that chaos. I'm not sure whether they're going to be able to do it personally. More cavalry coming across, more Grey Company, just being thrown into melee against Witch Realm units. Not easy for them. The Blackguard are here now, but they were a little bit depleted, so ultimately the Blade Masters, like, this is where the Blade Masters could really show their strength, because they're up against both of Angmar's strongest units and they could still do the business. What is going on here? Dunedain Troll Slayers are here. Warns of Alos Tyrion are still firing. Warns of North. I thought that was units coming forward and actually breaking through the lines then, but it's not. The Troll Slayers are trying to save the front line, but there's not much of a front line actually left at this point. Arthedain Pikemen. Some Evendim Spears in there as well, but it really isn't. Like, they've actually formed up another line here. Mithlon Marines and 4 Lindon Marines in position. Some Harlinden Guards still firing away, but the Warns of Alos Tyrion are really the ones they're relying on at this point. Lots of routing units in there. There's still 14 Knights of Anubis, Dunedain Rangers who still have ammunition. They need to be over here. Like, the Dunedain Rangers are not going to be very useful over here. I think some of the Dunedain's decision making in this fight has been questionable, to be honest with you. Some puzzling choices. I think Lindon's decision making has actually been very good to offset that. But, like, I don't understand why the Dunedain Rangers are over here. Like, what are you saving them for at this point? Your front line is literally crying out for another unit of Rangers. If you can condense fire with the Warns of Alos Tyrion, you could cause this assault to fall to pieces. Rangers are so devastating, and at this point, with the Dunedain Troll Slayers on the front line, that could be the final turn of the screw you need, and with that momentum, the defenders could go on to win this battle in adverse circumstances. I have to say, though, one thing we couldn't see, because I'm terrified of zooming in on fights where Rangers are shooting into big blobs of infantry, the Witches were over here at some point. We saw the green smoke rising from one body over here. It tells me the Witches had one... Well, there goes the Khandish general, run through with an axe. It's not good, but Khand are already quite depleted. But that tells me the Witches revealed themselves and then were torn apart by the defending archers. Prematurely revealing the Witches can result in that. Here we go. This is it from Son of the Dunedain. He's sort of a little bit hesitant, but he is now doing the right thing. If he can shoot in here with the Rangers, try and kill the Barrow Wights off as quickly as possible, that's how they're going to win this. Because the Barrow Wights, slowly but surely, alongside the Storm Guard, might be able to make something happen. There's still Trolls to deal with. There's Nazgul in there somewhere. On the back end of the settlement, Angmar still trying to make something happen with their elites. Noldor and Blade Master taking damage, but because of the hill advantage, because of the fact they are getting assistance, they are going to win this fight. And all of a sudden, I don't think the attackers have got enough left to see themselves over the line. I think the defenders are going to be able to hold their ground and keep Edoras in their hands, which would be a very impressive feat, to be honest with you, considering how this fight has gone. Let's see what's going on. Ruined Watchtower. I mean, they're definitely going to have to put the Carpenters to work. Meanwhile, Warns of Alos Tyrion looks like they're out of ammunition. 33 of them, though, could still be very useful in melee, considering their additional melee defense from their dual-wielding nature. But now the Dunedain Rangers going in. The Trolls are being committed to melee now as well. Desperate times, I think, for the attackers. They need to make something happen. They may not be as good as the Olag High that we used earlier, but they need something to try and smash through the lines, and it's going to have to be the Troll Drummers at this point. But they're going to fall pretty quickly at the hands of Dunedain Troll Slayers in melee. Pretty much the weakest Trolls in melee, and the clue is in the name. The Troll Slayers do alright when they're in melee with Trolls. Those axes are a very good choice of weapon, mechanically. The Trolls are trying to get into the Rangers, though, succeeding, but they should be just fine, especially with the support of the Warns of Alos Tyrion. This one remaining Troll Drummer, you saw how quickly they fell away, actually, in comparison to genuine battle Trolls. They were dealt with. Back here, perpetually routing units. Most of them are Evendims, though, so nothing too decisive. And Angmar here, they are going to be stopped dead in their tracks. The Grey Company here may not have been used in the way that I would have liked to see them used, but Son of the Dunedain was allowed to get away with that a little bit, I think. Like, they need to be out, and if they had just sort of run around on the outside of the map for a little while, if they had been saved until then and then sort of started shooting into the back of the attackers, that would have been the way to go. That's a very interesting phrase that the Mongol announcer comes out with there. There goes Angmar. Not sure I'd call Angmar's troops brave. I suppose they are. You rarely see Angmar chain route in the way that you can see the Misty Mountains and Mordor do so. I mean, Angmar here, on their last legs, and gone. Victory for the Noldorin Blade Masters, killing off both Witch Realm units, depleted as they may have been, as well as some Blackwatch Legions, still 26 of them remaining. Showing how powerful the Noldorin Blade Masters really are in melee. A devastating unit, to be sure. In melee, meanwhile, the Barrow Wight is still doing their thing. The Nazgul, are they still in here somewhere? They probably are, but they're going to blend in very easily with the Barrow Wights. A bunch of sinister-looking, hooded individuals moving forward. They do wield their weapon two-handed, so we may be able to see them. It's possible I'm just blind as well. There's still a few Stormguard, but they're sort of running low on manpower as well. And yeah, like pretty much at this point, it's just the Barrow Wights left from Gothmog, but they're not going to be enough to win the battle at this point. There's still Rangers back there, still Wardens of the North. They've still got too much in terms of melee strength, and now what the defenders need to do, I think, is just collapse in on this final vestige of the attackers' hopes. There's 6 Nazgul. They're in and amongst here, going after the Mythlon Marines and doing a lot of damage. They need reinforcements on the front line, the defenders. They can't afford to get too complacent. If you're able to isolate individual units against this many Barrow Wights, it's not really going to go too well for you in most cases. Grey Company could go around the back and start recharging now. Whatever happens to the Noldorin Blade Masters, they're heading to the front. Exactly what's needed. Probably will be the thing that will help finish off the Nazgul. Isengard pulling back. There goes Mordor's general. Again, it's mostly Angmar left though, and I'm pretty sure the Barrow Wights are locked morale. Nazgul killing off the bearded elf. Everyone's generals falling in quick succession, which perhaps shouldn't be too surprising. Here come the Noldorin Guard. I'd just toss the Wardens of the North into melee at this point. It looks as though they've still got ammunition, but I think just going brute force in melee, trying to bring the Barrow Wights down. But yeah, you can see the Barrow Wights now, victory seems certain. If the defenders throw this away from this point because they're being too cautious, Arthedain especially with their archers, like, I don't know what on earth they're waiting for. I've been fairly critical of Arthedain so far in this fight, but it's just little things like this. Like, what are you waiting for? This is the last bit of the attackers. Shoot your arrows into them. They're not going to give you an invitation. Just do it. Noldorin Blade Masters are waiting as well. Bizarre. Really bizarre. They'll be kicking themselves if they go on to lose this, the defenders. Because they've managed to recover from a really nasty situation at the hands of the Thatcher, and then of course the big push from the Trolls. Not easy to stabilise after that. It could have spiralled out of control and they didn't allow it to. If they were to throw it away in the late game by just being too slow, heartbreaking for them. Just wondering if the attackers have got anything left in reserve down here. Not really. Nothing. Just a sea of bodies. Please don't tell me that the Grey Company are just going to hang out back here. Grey Company need to go round and recharge. Like, again, it's another example of Son of the Dunedain being quite slow. Noldorin Blade Masters are now moving in. This should still be the defenders. Like, they've still got Rangers shooting in. I'm not sure how much ammunition the Dunedain Rangers still have left. But Wardens of the North and Noldorin Blade Masters should be enough to kill off these Barrow Wights at this point. There may be a couple of, like, I mean, there's one Stormguard left alive. Maybe a couple of Nazgul here and there, but not enough to make up for the huge discrepancy in quality. These are two really strong, heavy swordsmen. The Noldorin Blade Masters especially, but the Wardens of the North are maybe slightly more fresh, so that may be fairly key. They've still got 14 dismounted Knights of Illuminus that should be coming in here as well and mucking into melee. Noldorin Blade Masters are taking damage, you know. They are taking damage. I mean, they've been in melee against Angmar's units. Their hit points are almost certainly gone. And there are still Nazgul here. Still 3 of them. This could be the biggest bottle job of the century. If the defenders bottle it from here. Like, what are you... Again, they've got their bows out. Ammunition is here. What are you doing? There's some cavalry back there again. They need to recharge. You're not going to do huge damage to Barrow Wights, but all hands on deck to make sure that you don't throw this away at this point. And then Noldorin Blade Masters, I mean, they're shaken. They are shaken. They should be locked morale, so... I mean, if the defenders do go on to lose because of that, then that is something that can maybe be said against them. But, I mean, if they go on to lose from this point, it's because they've deserved it. 17 of them still alive. Are there any Nazgul left though? I think that's fairly key, because the Barrow Wights I think are really going to struggle to bring them down alone. There's a few Marines coming in to help them out as well. I think the defenders are just about going to be okay, especially when you consider there's Warns of the North in here, and they would still have to go through an entire unit of Rangers in melee as well, which, if they manage to get through this meat grinder, I don't think they're going to be able to do, but this was more of a nail-biter in the late game than it really ever needed to be. There's still units back here, and again, under normal circumstances, the Arthedain player should really have been punished for this sort of thing. There's one Nazgul left alive, but he's really surrounded by these Blade Masts at this point. One on every side. And it's only a matter of time before he falls, and with him, I think, the last spark of hope for the attackers will fall as well. In come the Warns of the North to try and help do the business. Really try and bring him down. Ah, finally. The depleted unit of Dunedain Scouts comes in. How helpful. Well, that's not the Dunedain Scouts. They were still out there somewhere. Thought that was Grey Company. This Nazgul is still alive. He's more surrounded by Wardens of the North now than Noldorin Blade Masters, to be honest with you. And he does get run through by a Warden of the North. And that should be that, you would imagine. But far closer than it had any right to be in the late game there. Once again, I think the defenders were able to turn the battle on its head, mainly because of the Rangers and Javelins. And for that, I'm going to give Lindon a little bit more credit, because they were more willing to utilise their resources, whereas Arthedain were a little bit more hold backish. And again, like Arthedain, like they are lucky, because this kind of decision making, if the attackers had just a little bit more left in the tank, would have cost them very dearly. But in the end, they just about managed to see themselves over the line. The defenders, very very close, within 10%. Here come the Dunedain Scouts again. And again, there's only 4 units left. I mean, those units are perpetually routing. The Everdem Archers actually did return, although there's only 13 of them, 1 marksman, so not a huge amount. But Rangers, very depleted, dismounted Knights of Anumnus. Not a lot left for the defenders, and they were just about able to see themselves over the line. It's interesting. I mean, again, I've really feared the worst for the defenders, and I do have to give them credit for coming back after that mauling at the hands of the Khandish Hwacha, which did very, very nicely. I think a key aspect of this was the Witchers, and I think this goes to show that the Witchers, even in a siege, if you reveal them to archers, they will do nothing. Like, they did nothing in this fight. They got 1 kill and were then ripped apart by presumably Dunedain Rangers, Wardens of Elostiri, and all manner of other archers as well. Did the business. Very similar kills for the defenders. Again, I have to give the MVP in this fight to Lindon, because I think they were the ones that really did better on the defence. Like, I don't want to sort of dump on the Arthedain player too much, but I really feel as though that the kind of habits that the Arthedain player was sort of exerting there, more often than not, will cause problems. They were quite fortunate they didn't here, because the Arthedain player did well as well. They managed to sort of reorganise their lines, do the business, use the javelins in particular on the back end of the settlement against Angmar, but a little bit too conservative with their assets. Like, there comes a time when you just need to dump everything into the attackers and blitz them down, and it could have been a little bit more comfortable for the defenders in the end, because the attackers really did run out of steam. The Hwacha did a lot of damage, the Trolls caused a lot of disruption, but looking back on it, maybe the attackers didn't have their troops sort of ready enough to take advantage of the disruption that happened at this top part of the hill, and they couldn't flood forwards in the way they wanted. The Trolls did, and did damage, but ultimately they were dealt with, and then Lindon were able to push back and actually re-establish a front line, which may have been the key turning point in the battle, especially considering the position of the front line was perfect for Rangers, which obviously they're the great equaliser. Ever since Rangers were introduced as they are, defenders have had much higher odds of winning on the defence. I would still put the advantage into the attackers' camp if they outnumber them in terms of armies, but there's no doubting that Rangers really help in that regard. Obviously, of course, ever since Rangers have been introduced as well, my frames have suffered, but hopefully in the hotfix there is actually something to stop that. Like, the blood sprays won't happen, which maybe will be enough. We shall see to make that not happen. But yeah, big thank you to Hrothgar for sending this one in for me. At least people can't complain that the blue team always wins, because in this case they actually took the advantage and then lost it again. I still think Khan did quite well, but they did ultimately take a lot of losses quite early. Like, they were the first attacking army to really start feeling the casualties, and they were still fighting for quite a long time with the Storm Guard at the end, but for the most part towards the end it was Angmar, and Angmar struggled in terms of kills again. If you don't do the business with the Witchers, if you don't do the business with your elites as Angmar, you're going to struggle. and so it proved to be here. As useful as the Barrow Wights were at sort of giving them hope in the late game, was never going to be enough to do the damage. Mordor, kind of a middling performance from them as well. Lots of damage taken from them throughout, which Mordor can absorb, but I think they just needed to be maybe a little bit more, have a little bit more nuance to their plans rather than the approach they took. Lindon, I thought, did very well. Arthedain, I think, did well in spite of the fact that I think they're a little bit conservative. Like, again, if this was a situation where the attackers had a little bit more left in the tank, the choices that Arthedain were making would have been terminal to their chances at winning the battle, which you've always got to be careful of, but still, very well done. Let's see what did the damage for Khand. I would imagine Brotherhood of the Axe got ripped apart by archers, I would assume, with a kill count like that, because they should have done better. Even against Lindon troops, where AP is not useful, the attack score of the Brotherhood of the Axe is still going to be useful to do damage. Nurad Stormguard did okay, considering the situation they were in. Footmen and Halberds initially did quite well, pushing through the lower tier of Arthedain, but once they got to the top of the hill, again, they suffered at the hands of the Rangers. Variag Warriors got ripped apart as well. Like, the armour upgrade did not help them at all when they were taking all that arrow fire. But yeah, the Hwacher was the MVP for Khand. Like, that was a really good use of the Hwacher, honestly. Like, looking, 214 kills all along the enemy army, including elites, sort of basic units, ranged units, all that you could want from the Hwacher it did. But positionally, the defenders still managed to do the business. A very interesting fight, this. There's a lot to sort of unpack. You know, I still feel as though there's a lot of lessons that can be taken away from this, like trying to consolidate your force into the back of the settlement where things are a little bit smaller, you can control the size of the engagement, is all well and good, but you do bottle yourself up and you do leave yourself at the mercy of weapons like a trebuchet or a Hwacher or even the Witchers. Like, the Witchers could have been so devastating in this battle, but they weren't, because they were used wrong. They went after archers when they should have gone after the front line, and they very roundly got defeated after that. As for the other side of things, there is something to be said, like the attackers had the momentum, but unless you have all of your army ready to take advantage of that sort of thing, it can actually work against you in the long run, because it is costly to sort of push like that. And in the end, the attackers weren't able to follow through, and the defenders, for a long time, they were disorganised. The attackers, I think, had ample opportunity to flood forwards, but they were just too far away to do that. And again, you have to be ready to take advantage of that sort of thing if you're going for it. It's risky because you put yourself in range of all the defending archers as well, but again, you've got to take that risk sometimes for it to pay off. And I think maybe Khand, considering the fact that they were the ones sort of leading the way, were more willing to do that than the other two. But it's, you know, you live and learn. So yeah, big thank you to Hrothgar for sending this one in. Big thanks to all the players for being part of a very interesting battle indeed. As for what's next, again, I'm not entirely sure. Like, this is another recording session, so probably have a little bit of a break and then go back to recording another one. Again, trying to make sure that I've got a decent store up to make sure for that week away that I'm able to just sort of carry on business as usual. That's not for a few weeks yet, but still worth planning ahead for. Still a bit more in store for Reforged. I was thinking about doing a video on the recent Baldur's Gate 3 stuff, but again, like, it's not really what people watch me for. So again, it's just if I have the time to actually put into that. It's kind of more of just something that I would want to do, more so than wanting to get something off my chest with like the KOTOR thing. But yeah, I mean, we'll see. I mean, it's one of those things. Like, I suppose I'll ask here at the end of this video if anyone's interested in seeing my thoughts on what the Baldur's Gate 3 reveal was. I was too young to play Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, so my perception isn't really coloured by that. In fact, I think 1 was actually out before I was born. I think, now that I think about it. But regardless, it is still a genre that I've gotten into recently. So it's something that I could talk about if people want me to, but if people don't want me to bother, then I'm not really too fussed about that, and I can continue with business as usual. Not sure what battle will be next. I think I do have another hotfix battle I could show, but I also have quite a hefty backlog on 0.97 original, which, to be fair, I think I do now need to start sort of really working through, because obviously with the hotfix getting closer, eventually these replays will be defunct. So I will need to really get through them as quickly as I possibly can. So yeah, hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.